Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast as part of the Believe Podcast Network. My name is Tyler, and today we are going to be unfortunately recapping the end of the Orioles' sweepless streak. They get swept by the St. Louis Cardinals on the road in St. Louis, and the sweepless streak ends at 106 series. We'll get into that today. I don't know how much I'm going to dig into individual games because, and I'll talk about why. I don't think it matters too terribly much, but we will talk about it just a little bit. But before we get to that, I do want to remind everybody about our sponsor for this week, and that sponsor is Bet Online. If you're on YouTube right now, you can see I am on the Bet Online website, which is betonline.ag. Bet Online is your number one source for the NBA and NHL playoffs this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. If you head over to the website, which I said is betonline.ag today, you can get in on the action. And don't forget, you can use our promo code. This is new for our reading here. Promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV. That's again, BLEAV, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. So you put in a deposit, you'll get 50% of that back as a bonus up to $1,000. So head over to betonline.ag to get involved. Use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to get your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, the game starts here. And as always, we want to thank Bet Online for sponsoring the Warehouse Podcast. All right, let's get into a quick discussion of the end of the Orioles' sweepless streak, which ends at 106 series and spans a little over 2 years and basically the entirety of Adley Rutschman's major league career to this point. I say a quick recap because it's a bummer of a series. It's also a weird series where there were rain delays aplenty. Your starting pitchers couldn't go deep into games because of, in one case, the rain kind of knocking Kyle Bradish out of the game. And then in the other one, John Means, yes, it coincided with the rain delay, but also we hear afterwards John Means might have some more discomfort in that surgically repaired elbow. We'll get into that a little bit. So there's some weirdness and some randomness to that where, theoretically, your best pitcher is not allowed to pitch as far as they can because the weather doesn't cooperate. Okay. Yes, you're going to be more likely to lose games where your best pitcher's out and you have to rely on your bullpen a lot. Second of all, the sweepless streak itself is something of a statistically anomaly, which, the Orioles have lost 3 games in a row during this sweepless streak. It hasn't happened a whole lot. They haven't lost a lot of games in a row, but they have lost 3 games in a row. They've lost 2 games in a row. And in some situations, series are only 2 games long. It just hasn't happened that they've lost those games in a row against the same opponent, which there's something to be said there. It's, when you become familiar with an opponent, you learn, you grow, you get better. And the fact that you get better enough to overcome, what was a deficiency for you in one game in order to win that the next time, it is commendable and it's impressive. And obviously the Orioles results on the field have been amazing for the last 2 years. They went to the playoffs last year with 101 games, 101 wins rather. The year before that, they almost made it despite a really slow start to the year in 2022. Obviously, Rutschman comes up, really kickstarts them, and they play really well for the final, 5 months of the season. Wasn't quite enough. But in the end, it's an anomaly, right? The Orioles are not, that much better than their competition where they are unable to be swept. It just wasn't what happened during that run. And third of all, they did get swept in the ALDS. And I know that's something that people, I think there's two schools of thought on that. One is the people that go, yeah, exactly. This sweepless streak wasn't even real because they did get swept back in October when it really mattered. What a bunch of bums. And then there's the other people that say, okay, but it was a sweepless streak for the regular season. And we're in the regular season and you're playing, varying degrees of teams in the regular season. It's a slightly different sport in the regular season than the postseason where, there's attrition, there's injuries, there's hot streaks and cold streaks. And the fact that the Orioles are able to, withstand all of those to not be swept in a 2-year span is really impressive. And it is impressive. And I think the fact that the Orioles did it for an entire season last year was obviously a reflection of how good the team was. And I think they were the last team this season to not be swept. And again, the Orioles are one of the best teams in baseball. So it is definitely a reflection of how good the Baltimore Orioles are. But it's not that much more important than a lot of other metrics out there. And at the end of the day, your team is what your record says your team is, and the Orioles are a really good team. And are they, do they have some deficiencies? Certainly. Does the offense have some things where they kind of fall down a little bit and don't play up to their potential? Certainly, we saw that in this series. But I just think that the sweepless streak itself was a culmination of some statistical anomalies mixed with obviously very good play on the field from the Orioles. And then this series was almost like the perfect storm for them to end the sweepless streak. You're on the road against an opponent you're not familiar with. Your starting pitchers get knocked out early in two of the games because of the weather being weird. And your offense also had one of those weeks or those 3-day patches where they just couldn't quite get over the hump. So I'm not going to sit here and overreact to 3 games in a 162 game sample size the way that I feel like some folks on social media are. It doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve you. It's just not really useful or worth the time, I think. The Orioles, they weren't good enough. They were not good enough. And it happens sometimes. And now you rebound. And, should we feel any different because they lost these 3 games in a row versus if they won 1 game here and 1 game in a series against the White Sox? Like, I think I would feel really, really bad about that. You'd go, 2-5 against teams that are not great. Obviously, the Cardinals are okay. They've been worse than I think they expected to be. And then the White Sox are terrible, which we'll talk about here at the end. But in general, the sweepless streak would continue if they won 1 game here and 1 game in Chicago. But would you feel good about the Baltimore Orioles? No. You'd feel a lot better, I think, if they got swept in St. Louis and then they go to Chicago and win 3 out of 4 or even win 4 out of 4. I'd feel a lot better about that, even though the sweepless streak would be over at that point. So there's no reason to panic here because of the results of this one series. It's a bummer that the streak ends, but they're ending the streak as the AL record holders in that regard. And you know what? That's really commendable. It was really fun. It was cool that it encompassed an entire season in 2022. You can always say the Orioles didn't get swept in the regular season for the entirety of 2023. Rather, I just said 2022. I meant 2023. Like, really commendable. And the Orioles, they were a really good team coming into the series. They're still a really good team. They just didn't play as well this week as the Cardinals did, and the weather didn't help them out. So I don't want to dwell too much on it. They need to play better, but that's kind of the long and the short of it for me is statistical anomaly compounded by another statistical anomaly, and the Orioles will move on from here, and they're still going to win a lot of ball games. So let me know if you're on YouTube right now watching this. Let me know what you think about that. Am I kind of pushing it to the side too much? Am I covering up for some of the Orioles' issues that have been unmasked in this series, or is this just sort of what happens in a long 162 game season? Is you go on the road and you lose games sometimes, and as long as you bounce back, it's okay. That's just kind of where I'm at. And now we don't have to hear about the sweepless streak anymore. It's over, and that's not a thing that the fan base has to talk about. I doubt it's I doubt it's a thing the players cared about, but you know what? They're human. I'm sure they're like, oh yeah, like it's kind of cool that nobody can beat us all 3 times or even 2 times. Like, nobody can do it. We're just, impenetrable. And, that's gone now. And maybe that, builds a little fire inside them a little bit to say like, man, we got complacent a little bit and we need to step up our game. And we know we are better than the St. Louis Cardinals. We just didn't show it this week. And you know what? We know we are better than the Chicago White Sox. We're a lot better than the Chicago White Sox. So let's go take out our frustration on a really bad Chicago White Sox team this weekend or this extended weekend and show the world that we're the Baltimore Orioles. We're coming for that AL pennant. We're coming for that World Series and just, make sure everything's right with the world. That would be fantastic. And I think I would take that if that's what comes out of this sweepless streak ending is the fire to get even better, then you know what? I'll take it. But yeah, that's all I've got to say about the games, really. We can dive into them a little bit here if I'm thinking about it. But in general, that's my big takeaway. So I think what I'd like to move into now are some news items from the week. So first off, Mike Baumann, we covered in the last episode that Mike Baumann was DFA'd in order to get Grayson Rodriguez back on the active roster. He has been acquired by the Seattle Mariners, as we kind of said. He isn't a guy that was going to go unclaimed. He, too talented, too much of a track record. Just, he seemed like he'd lost his spot in the Orioles setup just because they've got too much talent. And he wasn't quite turning the corner like I think a lot of us thought maybe he was, midsummer last year. Just wasn't quite happening. So he goes to the Seattle Mariners in a trade. Mike Baumann goes along with catcher Michael Perez to the Seattle Mariners, and the Orioles do get something back for him, and it's catching prospect Blake Hunt, who the Orioles then optioned to AAA Norfolk. So I think this is an interesting one because the Orioles, from my understanding, had kind of a cavern of catching prospects in the upper minors that I think they expected to be ready to catch major league pitching as soon as this year. I know that Samuel Basallo is viewed as a great prospect, especially on the offensive side for the Orioles long term, but they needed a guy that I think they felt a little bit more confident in turning to defensively. And with James McCann in the final year of his contract, I doubt McCann's the guy the Orioles are going to bring back next year unless it's on, a league minimum deal or a minor league deal, that he can get invite to spring training. And I think James McCann's probably earned, a little bit more than that to go elsewhere. So McCann's probably going to be gone after this season. So that brings Blake Hunt into the conversation. And just to, acclimate everybody with Blake Hunt, because it's not somebody that I was terribly familiar with. I'm not terribly. I wasn't familiar with him at all. I'm not a guy that really scours the minor leagues too terribly much. I'm familiar with the Orioles guys, but if you go beyond, the top 50 prospects in all of baseball, I'm pretty much blind there. But Blake Hunt, if you head over to MLBpipeline.com, as of my recording now, they still have him assigned to the Mariners top 30 list. So if you go to the Orioles list and look for him, you're not going to find him. You might by the time this is out, but as I'm recording it, he's still in the Mariners list, and he's listed as their 23rd best prospect out of 30. So not a top 100 guy. He is 25 years old, 6'4", 215 pounds. So a pretty big guy behind the plate. He was drafted in 2017 as a competitive balance pick for the San Diego Padres. And MLB Pipeline gives him an overall grade of 40. That's on the 80 scale, he's a 40, which is slightly below average, I think, in terms of a major league player. But for a minor leaguer, he's certainly got an impressive skill set there. And they do view him as a very good defender. They give him a 55 grade for his arm and a 60 grade for his fielding. So the bottom paragraph here in their little scouting report, I think, is what the Orioles probably would key in on. And that paragraph is, even with some offensive hiccups, his glove could carry him to the show. His 6'3", 215-pound frame has perhaps correlated with him struggling to throw out runners, yet he still consistently posted sub 2-second pop times. Above all, his instincts and acumen are the type that the Mariners covet, and from a communication standpoint with their pitchers. So I think that's a pretty glowing, profile on his defense. Like, yes, okay, he's struggling to throw out runners, and I know that that's been sort of a point of contention with the Orioles at the big league level this year, not necessarily on the catchers, but on the pitchers not holding runners great and giving the catchers no real chance. And so if you combine that with a guy that's, from their input here, struggled to throw out runners, it's not a great combination. But, that's neither here nor there. He, in general, seems to have a good rapport with his pitchers and gets glowing remarks for his defense. So for me, you're losing Mike Baumann. You're not losing him for nothing. You now have an option as a, what sounds like a backup catcher kind of profile for the Orioles as soon as this year. If McCann gets hurt, Blake Hunt, I imagine, could step in and, make his major league debut. I'm not sure that you view a rookie as your ideal sort of backup catcher. That tends to be more of a veteran type of role, but you do what you can with what you got. And as far as his offense is concerned, I know they said there that his His offense has kind of lagged a little bit behind, but his numbers, and again, you shouldn't really scout based on the box score at the minor league level. It's just not the best way to do things because there's so many extenuating circumstances. And as we've heard, regarding Jackson Holiday, there's a big gap between AAA and MLB level, players nowadays. But his performance at AAA Tacoma for the Mariners has been really great this year. He's hitting 293 with a 372 on base and a 533 slugging, which is a 905 OPS. He has got 4 home runs, 4 doubles, a triple. So 9 of his 24 hits, or 9 of his 22 hits rather, have been for extra bases. Has struck out 10 times and walked 6 times. So 10 strikeouts over 75 at bats, 24 games is a really good, strikeout rate. He's not striking out a whole bunch. He's a guy that puts the ball in play. And I think, if you've got a guy on the roster for his glove, when he's starting, he's probably hitting 9th. You feel pretty good about that. So I think, I've said this before on the show. I was a Baumann fan. I really liked his stuff, but I understand at this point you're out of options. You're not really producing great at the big league level. We need guys that are going to help us win now. I'm not so sure Baumann was that guy anymore. And you lose him, but you do get back a guy that now has years of control, fills a need for the organization. Samuel Basayo is coming up, but we understand that his strengths are mostly offensive, and there is some potential that he moves off of the catcher position at some point, which the Orioles, if they want Basayo and Rutschman on the team at the same time, they're probably going to need to do that anyway. You're not going to have, if Basayo's bat is as good as everybody is hoping it will be, you're going to want them both in the lineup. And the Orioles don't love to clog up the DH spot with a dedicated DH. So Basayo is probably going to have to learn first base at that point. And then Hunt seems like a perfect fit. If the Orioles feel like they had a chasm at sort of that backup catcher, defense first catcher role in the upper minors, Hunt feels like a perfect sort of fit there. Again, this is not, according to scouting reports, again, I get my information from these publicly available sources that anybody else can get. I'm not going to see the Tacoma Rainiers play games very often, so I've never watched Blake Hunt play a baseball game, but all of these scouting reports sound really good for what the Orioles need in the organization right now. So sucks to lose Baumann, but getting Hunt back feels like a really good value, a good trade, and coming at a good time for the Orioles. So there's a positive silver lining there in the week. Now to get more negative again. So John Means started the final game of this series against the St. Louis Cardinals. Came out after 3 innings. I think initially the thought was he came out, simply due to the rain. And I think even if he wasn't feeling nicked up rather, he would have come out of the game anyway because it was an extended delay. But we hear after the game that John Means is being evaluated for some elbow soreness in that left elbow, which is the same one he had Tommy John surgery on 2 years ago at this point. It's been an extended, rehab process for him. He had the setback last summer that delayed his return until September, then had some shoulder stuff, some back stuff that kept him from making the ALDS roster. And then his season was delayed, apparently intentionally, so that he could have a full off season's worth of work. And he didn't debut for the Orioles until, I think less than a month ago. He debuted earlier this month. So to hear he's back with some elbow soreness is really unfortunate. They talked to Brandon Hyde after the game, and he just said that was disappointing. Could tell a little something wasn't right and was trying to gut through it, but he did feel some elbow soreness and we're hoping for the best. And then Means declined to speak with the media after the game, understandably, probably a little bit upset and concerned. He's worked really hard to get back, and to kind of have your body fail you again is really unfortunate. So I think if we go look at Baseball Savant here and you look at Means, the numbers are pretty ugly and tell you that physically something was not right. So he averaged 88.6 miles per hour on his fastball. He came into the game averaging 90.5 miles per hour, so it was down almost 2 ticks on the radar gun. He had just 1 whiff on 12 swings, which, the hitters weren't fooled by it. His changeup, He threw it didn't get any whiffs, which normally his changeup is sort of his bread and butter. He gets sometimes like a 50% whiff rate on it. So that was ugly too. So the numbers are bad. He's uncomfortable in his elbow. That's bad. Um, it doesn't sound very promising here is all I'm going to say. That, I'm not a doctor. The fact that Means didn't want to talk about it, the fact that Hyde's being not super forthcoming and seems pretty down, doesn't paint a good picture. So I'm a little concerned here that John Means' season could be over. At the very least, I imagine he's going on the IL after this, which is a bit of a problem for the Orioles because they've said for a bit now that with this long stretch of games where I think they play like 42 games in 43 days or something like that, they were going to move to a 6-man rotation at one point, which was going to include Means and then also Cole Irvin, who did pitch in this game. And, you imagine if Means goes in the IL that Irvin will kind of step into his role, but that still only gives them 5 starters for a portion of the schedule where they were hoping to use all 6 of them. So that presents another issue where, okay, where do the Orioles turn now? If Means is hurt and they need that 6th starter, what are they going to do? Tyler Wells is also still dealing with some discomfort. He hasn't even, I don't think he's even started throwing yet, so he could still be a month away, maybe more. So where do the Orioles turn? I think, it's helpful to look at roster resource on this one over at Fangraphs. So I think if you look at the 40-man roster, that becomes like the first place you would want to check for guys that could step in easily without the Orioles having to bend over backwards or anything or impact the 40-man roster. Additionally, it's just easiest to promote a guy, preferably someone with options that you can then demote later when you want to shift back to a 5-man or whatever it may be. There's not a lot of great answers here. The pitchers on the 40-man that are not in the majors right now are Brian Baker, Jonathan Heasley, Seth Johnson, Matt Crook, Corbin Martin, Caleb Ort, Dylan Tate, Nick Vespi, and Bruce Zimmerman. I think the name that jumps out right there is going to be Bruce Zimmerman. Obviously not a guy that you're going to feel comfortable saying, hey, Bruce, every 6th day is yours. But he could be a guy you feel, okay, Bruce, let's maybe get you through the lineup one time, or even you could do an opener situation. This could be very, very 4 years ago and say, or 5 years ago, I guess at this point, and say, all right, we're going to have Keegan Aikens start the game, go 1 inning, get through their first 3-4 hitters. Then Bruce will come in. He'll go through the order, 1.5 times. You can, he can skip the first 4 hitters the first time, go 5 through 9, get 1 through 4, and then maybe go 5 through 9 again. So you can maybe theoretically get him through 3 or 4 innings if he pitches really well. That's a little bit more complicated, but it is something that you could do. I think the name on here that people probably aren't familiar with, and I'm not really even familiar with too much, is going to be Corbin Martin. So he's a 28-year-old that the Orioles got, I think, from the Astros recently, or maybe he was drafted by the Astros when Elias was there, and that's what made me think about it. So they claimed him off waivers from the Brewers earlier this month. And let's look at him here. So he's pitched 7 games in the majors. In 2022 was the last time he was in the major leagues. So don't love that. Started just 2 games. And then in 2024 in the minors, he's pitched in 11 games. None of them have been starts. He missed all of the 2023 season. So probably not a guy you're going to turn to as a starting option. So as far as guys on the 40-man roster, it's Bruce Zimmerman or kind of nobody, I think. Unless you want to do the old school opener or, do the thing where you filter through some guys to do a bullpen game, once a week, which again is tough in such a stretch, but it is something you could do. And you could call some guys up to, pitch an inning here. All right, now we're sending you down. We'll bring up the next guy and he'll pitch an inning and then he'll go to, you could do that kind of a thing and burns through some options there. But that's one way to do it. The other thing that I think people are going to want to do, like from a fan base perspective, is call up a prospect. And there are 3 guys in Norfolk right now that are Rule 5 eligible this December. So the Orioles will either have to add them to the 40-man roster then or risk losing them in the Rule 5. Are going to be Cade Povich, Chase McDermott, and Justin Armbruster. of those three, Povich is going to be the one most likely. And I say that even though I think he's the youngest of the bunch, he was in AAA last year through 45 and a third innings. Some of his metrics are good. He struck out 10.5 per nine, which is great, but he also walked almost 6 per nine. Excuse me, there's an ambulance going by. Hopefully they're not going to pick up John Means for his elbow. That was in bad taste. But anyway, back to Cade Povich. So there are some numbers there that in 2023 looked pretty good, although it was only in 10 starts, not even 50 innings. This year he's back at AAA. He's gone 5-1 with a 2.08 ERA, a 3.62 xFIP. He's striking out over 12 per nine and walking 3 per nine. So his numbers are looking much more like a starting pitcher of major league quality. I know he was a guy that was on some top 100 prospect lists or just off of them going into last season. Didn't pitch particularly well in terms, I think he looked more like a reliever in some ways given his high walk numbers. But this season he's really bounced back, looked good, been limiting home runs, getting a lot of strikeouts. I think he's really close to being ready. So if the Orioles say, hey, you've got 100 innings of AAA under your belt, we feel like you've done the thing we like you to do, which is sort of master the level this year. I'd rather bring you up for your ceiling than call up Bruce Zimmerman, given we have to sort of transform the pitching staff to make Bruce Zimmerman work versus you have the potential to be a back end starter anyway. And we think maybe you can get to it sooner than any of these other guys. They could potentially give Povich a shot. I know McDermott's really caught some eyes lately. He's having some walk issues where he's, basically striking out. He's striking out twice as many as he's walking, but he's striking out a lot of guys. So let me just look at his numbers real quick since we're here. So Chase McDermott, 14 strikeouts per nine, but 5 or 6 walks per nine. So I was a little bit off there, but close. He's striking out a little bit more than twice as many as he's walking, but his walk numbers are a little bit problematic. I think if you're turning to a guy to start games for you, that's just going to be too many pitches too soon. Plus you're not going to be getting 14 strikeouts per nine as a rookie. It's just probably not going to be happening. So McDermott, I think, would be behind Povich. And then I can look at who did I say? Armbruster here as well. So Armbruster has a 9.35 ERA. His xFIP is only 6.57, so he hasn't pitched quite as bad as his ERA would indicate. 10 strikeouts per nine, great, but almost 6 walks per nine. So again, of those three, Povich is the one that, if you're going to go that route, is going to be the one called up. But again, he's not on the 40-man yet, so you'd have to put him on there. And then I believe their 40-man would be full. I think they're at 39 players right now. So Povich would fill that up. And I know historically Elias likes to keep a spot open in case there's an interesting waiver claim. So it doesn't mean Povich won't come up. You could see Povich come up and then they DFA somebody else. That probably isn't going to be a huge loss if they want to do that. But they don't have to do that. They could always DFA somebody later on if an interesting waiver claim comes. But just historically, Mike Elias does like to keep a spot open there, so something to be mindful of. But yeah, I mean, the big issue there is going to be Means. Means when he's pitched is what I think you hope Povich is. I mean, Povich is going to be more of a strikeout guy than Means has really ever been. But what I mean is John Means is a competent, good major league pitcher, left-handed, that has a track record of being really good for the Orioles. And now he's hurt for the 3rd consecutive season in an area where it's usually not a good sign for pitchers. And for him personally, a potentially second significant elbow injury is a career threatener for him. It doesn't mean he can't come back, but look, he's 31 years old, has been through this once. His body has not responded well, seemingly. I don't want to speak out of turn here. And, it could be nothing. There could be some scar tissue or something that just needs a cleanup. That still is going to require an IL stint, though. You're not going to just bounce back from that, on a normal rotation. He's going to have to take some time off and then probably need a rehab stint after that. So we're talking about, late summer at that point. You're probably missing all of June, maybe coming back July by the All-Star break. And that's like optimistically. So I don't know. It's a really upsetting thing for Means. It's a problem for the Orioles that they'd have to solve now. But again, hopefully I'm just jumping the gun and it just was, he woke up on it, slept on it weird or something, and just couldn't shake it, and he'll be all right next time out. But I'm kind of bracing for the worst, and at least the Orioles do have some intriguing options behind him. All right, well, that's it for all the off-field news. And I know I kind of said at the beginning I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on the games because I just don't think that an odd series like this really warrants too much analysis when to me it feels just like a blip on the radar. I'm also not going to give out awards like normally because again, it was just abysmal. It was a miserable series. I I don't want to overreact to it. I do want to give one shout out to Kyle Bradish, who, we're talking about this injury stuff with John Means. He's a guy that unfortunately has really struggled to bounce back from his Tommy John, his elbow issues. Kyle Bradish, on the other end of the spectrum, this is a guy that we know has a partial UCL tear. We learned about it in February. He's, probably known about it since a little bit, obviously earlier than that. Delayed his season by about a month, but I mean, the guy's pitching like there's nothing wrong. He is using his slider a bunch. He pitched well in this series, went 5 innings, 1 run, 5 whiffs on 14 swings with his slider. He looks like the ace again. And I think, we talk about Means missing time, and that is going to be problematic for the Orioles. But Bradish pitching the way he is, Burns pitching the way he is, Rodriguez pitching the way he is. Yes, you need to survive the season. You need to win your, 93 games or whatever to make the playoffs or whatever it takes in the AL East this year. But I think the Orioles right now, with those three, as long as they are healthy, which is always a big if with pitchers of any kind, but particularly Bradish with the elbow stuff, and we've already seen Rodriguez at the IL for a brief amount of time this year. But with those three guys, you've got to feel fantastic about the Orioles' potential going into the postseason, where an opposing lineup has to face those three guys, knowing that they can go all out because it's the playoffs. And you know what? We're going to use our bullets while we got them. And hopefully they're going to beef up the bullpen by then. And the Orioles, I know it feels really tough right now to lose 3 games in a row to a team that you feel the Orioles are superior to, and they are, and you should. But the Orioles, man, Kyle Bradish pitching this well, despite the injury stuff, is really impressive. And it's something I haven't experienced in my lifetime as an Orioles fan of, one ace type pitcher in a rotation, let alone 3 ace type pitchers, because that's what a healthy Kyle Bradish is. This is no fluke for him anymore. He was, fantastic down the stretch in 2022. He was a Cy Young candidate all of 2023. And since he's been back, he has been spectacular. The only negative with him is that the Orioles are understandably slow playing him as he's coming back from that injury, and they don't want to use him up because he only threw 74 pitches here. Again, he came out early because of some weather stuff. But I don't think the Orioles would have pushed him too terribly much further. He might have gone one more inning and thrown another, 12 pitches or something, 15 pitches, but they weren't going to have him go 110 pitches or anything, which goes back to a point I made last episode, which is that I think the Orioles are managing this season with the expectation that they are going to the playoffs, and they need to make sure that their best guys are ready to go come playoff time. We've already seen Rutschman get a day off. I feel like he's DHing a lot this year. They're making sure he's fresh. Same thing with the pitchers. We're not going to Corbin Burns, as much as you guys, everyone wants to see him be like that old school horse that goes 220 innings and throws 120 pitches a game. That's not how the Orioles are managing this. They are managing this with the hope of making a World Series run. Yeah, it'd be great to win 101 games again. What does it matter if you get swept in the ALDS? It doesn't. I'd much rather win 95 or 93 or whatever, win some baseball games, go to the ALCS, go to the World Series. And that's what I feel like the Orioles are managing this with. Obviously, Bradish with the rain stuff was a little bit different, but in general, he's been fantastic. And that's another positive to take away from this. So I think that's kind of where I want to leave the thoughts of this week, is that bummer to lose 3 in a row, bummer for the sweepless streak to be gone. But how I feel is it was a bit of a statistical anomaly anyway. It was great that it happened. We'll always have that it happened. Now we move forward, and there are a lot of positives for this baseball team. Yes, the offense has to get over their streakiness, and I know it's a talking point right now. They need to be a little more patient at the plate. This feels a lot like the Adam Jones conversation of the 2010s, where it was like, okay, Yeah, he's a free swinger, but he's also an all-star and one of the best hitting center fielders in the league. Do you, you know, take one away to just to lose the other? Um, it's sort of a team of that right now where the Orioles are hitting a bunch of home runs. They're scoring runs in general, but yeah, they're going to slump sometimes because, you can't depend on every day out, but I'll still take the good with the bad. Um, and I will say the Orioles aren't ignoring it. The Baltimore Banner had an article by John Mioli last week. He spoke to Ryan Fuller, one of the Orioles hitting coaches, and he acknowledged that we have to get a little bit better at, managing the strike zone, managing the counts, all that stuff. But I think it really comes down to swing decisions. And if they're chasing a bunch, that's a problem. If they're not scoring runs, that's a problem. But if in the end the outcomes are positive, then there's not really a need to overhaul things. Maybe just tweak here and there. And again, a large portion of the Orioles lineup is quite young. You know, as good as Gunnar Henderson's been, Jordan Westburg's been, Colton Cowser's been, these are still young guys that are learning as they go. And I expect there to be ebbs and flows. And right now we're kind of in one of those downward um, trajectories in terms of patience at the plate. But I think it'll come back and you just got to ride it out, man. It's 162 games. There's going to be good weeks and bad. This hasn't been a great week so far, but this next series gives us a really good opportunity for there to be a lot of better stuff. And as I say that, let's do a quick preview of the series. It's coming up against the Chicago White Sox, who have been horrific this year. So game one is Thursday at 7:40 p.m. It's Grayson Rodriguez against Mike Clevenger. That game is on MASN and MLB Network. Friday, another 7:40 p.m. start. That's going to be Corbin Burns versus Chris Flexen. That is on Apple TV Plus. So be aware of that. Apple TV Plus, not on MASN, not on regular TV. You need to have an Apple TV Plus subscription, which, I don't. So I might use my trial on that. Maybe I'll spring for it for a month or something. But in general, I haven't been seeing the Apple TV Plus game. So that is where that will be. Saturday, back on MASN. It is 2:10 p.m. local. Dean Kramer against Eric Fetty. And then the Sunday finale, another 2:10 start. That's Kyle Bradish against, I think his name's Garrett Crochet, right? Yeah, Garrett Crochet, who is very good. So that's going to be a pitching matchup right there. Bradish against Crochet. Crochet is a really fun pitcher to watch. So that could be a fun one. But in general, with Bradish on the mound, with Burns on the mound, and with Rodriguez on the mound in this series, you have to feel good about the Orioles' odds against any opponent, much less against the Chicago White Sox, who have been as bad as we expected them to be this year. So this is an opportunity, right, for the Orioles to right the ship, turn this negative week into a good one. Hopefully we get positive news on John Means, and we'll kind of go from there. I think that's going to wrap up what I've got to say for this episode. Sorry for being a little rambling, dealing with some stuff in the background here as I chase toddlers around to get this episode up, but I really appreciate you guys sticking with me. I do want to remind everybody, we are on the Believe Podcast Network. That's BLEAV.com. Head over there, check out our podcast show and all the other shows they have on the Believe Network. And we are sponsored this week by betonline.ag. So again, thank you to BetOnline for the support. And you can head over to betonline.ag and use promo code BLEAV for 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Thanks so much for watching. Please support the show by going over to our social media at The Warehouse Pod on X and on Threads. Head over to YouTube and search The Warehouse Podcast and subscribe to us there. It is free and really helps us out. Give us a like and leave a comment on what you thought of this series against the St. Louis Cardinals. It was a real bummer, but please give us your perspective. And then subscribe to us on your preferred podcast app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it may be. And please give us a rating of 5 stars and a review. That'd be great. Helps us reach more listeners. But yeah, I think that's about all I've got for this episode. Thank you again for checking us out and supporting the show. My name is Tyler, and this has been The Warehouse Podcast.